everyone. We are back for another episode of Thinking That Matters. And part of my goal for 2024 was to have guests on the podcast. And I must say, I am super excited because Fred and I are here in Tampa, Florida, and I get the privilege of interviewing my sister-in-law, Melody Mahusay. And so Melody, give them the brief, if you were, giving them a little 30 to 60 second commercial, tell them who you are, what you do.
Yep.
And then we'll get going.
I am the neighborhood piano and voice teacher. I've been doing that for about 8 years now. And I also accompany for choirs and instrumentalists in the school system all over Hillsborough County.
And the fun thing about that is before Fred and I moved to Texas, we lived here in Hillsborough County. So it's fun to hear her going to schools that we were super familiar with because I worked at one of the high schools, as did Fred. And now so just for perspective purposes as an accompanist, because you're right now in crazy season.
Yes.
So give us perspective, like how many soloists or choirs, like number-wise, are you playing for?
So I have 6 local choruses that I play for. So that involves going into the classrooms and rehearsing with the kids. But this time of year, I'm also playing for soloists who will go in front of an adjudicator. It's both instrumentalists and singers. They go in front of the adjudicator. It takes about 10 minutes, and they tell them, yay, you did great, or these are things that you can work on. Yeah, and as an example, this coming Saturday, this coming weekend, I have 36 instrumentalists that I'm going to be
Is that all in one day?
2 of them are on Friday. The rest are on Saturday.
The rest are on Saturday.
Yay.
Your fingers are going to be tired.
Yes, I'm always tired by the end of the day.
I can imagine. So let's pause because I'd love for you to share, because obviously we could assume you're passionate about music, but how would you vocalize what you're passionate about?
Well, it's very interesting that you are asking me this question because I think it was just a week ago. I believe it was just a week ago. Obviously, I'm passionate about music. But we turned around in church during the greet your neighbor time, and I turned around and, you do need to know, one of my students was playing the keyboard.
Okay, at church.
At church. So that's
cool.
the day. I'm watching him play the keyboard, one of my kids. And I turned around and the lady goes, "You're the piano teacher." And I stood there for a second and I was like, yes, I am the piano teacher. And I got a little bit of a God shiver because that is what I'm passionate about. There's going to come a day when I can't get up there and play anymore. And we got to be raising these kids up to take those places.
Ooh, you might make me start crying. Too early.
Sorry.
That's awesome, though. So if you were articulating then, are you saying that your passion is raising others up? Or put that into words for me.
I think that is well said, what you just said. I would call it equipping. Equipping the ones who are coming behind us to be able to continue. You're trying to leave a legacy.
Well, and what's interesting, I would love for you to share with them a little bit of, because you've had a legacy left for you. Mm-hmm. Your mom is still here, obviously, but I've watched her. Okay, so you probably should know this, that we've known each other a really long time.
Yeah. So at least 4 years.
Let's see. I first met you in 91? 92? 1992. So it's been a hot second. Mm-hmm. Hot second. But tell them a little bit about your background because your passion is empowering, equipping others. But you didn't start as a piano teacher. No. So tell them a little bit about your background.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, that was one of the things I swore I would never do was teach piano lessons. And not because I don't love piano, but my parents were church musicians for years and years and years. So every church that I ever grew up in, my mother was the organist, and my dad was either the choir director or he was one of the soloists there. So that was my background. And I grew up watching my parents always have to have a second job because church musicians are not paid very much. And my mother taught piano lessons in the home, and I was like, I just don't want to do that. I wanted to be financially independent. I didn't want to have to depend on no man for my money. And so because of that, I ended up going to law school after college. And I did that for about 10 years. And lesson learned from that is I made a lot of money and I was very unhappy because I wanted to be home with my kids. And so I did that for about 10 years and then came home to be with my kids for 10 years. And during that season of life, I sold jewelry in home shows, which was a great way to be home with the kids, but also still bring in some income to the house. And what's funny about that is I stopped doing that. And then very shortly after that, my husband, the whole company went under that he was working for. And so we were scrambling immediately because I had stopped doing the jewelry business and he did not have income anymore. So we were like, what are we going to do? So about 3 or 4 months into that adventure, I had probably within the span of a week, 4 or 5 people say to me, do you teach piano lessons? And I said, no. And then finally, I was like, hello, do you teach piano lessons? Yes, I do. Yes, I do that. So, I mean, kind of ashamed to say that the reason I started to do it was we just needed to have income in the house. But I've been the happiest I've been ever in my professional life.
I've heard if we were to segment the things that you just said, it's almost like, because you should know Melody's a big football fan as well.
Indeed.
So we're going to put it into 4 quarters
you.
far of your life, okay? First quarter, parents, musicians in the church, always having a second job. And you were telling yourself, I don't want to have to do that. If you put the Wayback Machine on and you go, well, okay, let's be clear. We're not that far way back, but okay. But if you put back when you were in high school, because you were involved in music then as well, because you were at a school that was very specialized in music, correct?
It wasn't that. It was the high school that I was able to sing at had a long and storied history of fantastic music, both chorus and I played for the jazz band because I played piano.
Okay, got it. So when you think about the things, thoughts that you were thinking, one, I heard you say, I don't want to have to depend on no man in terms of the financial piece. Any others that kind of come to your mind as you recall that quarter or season of your life? Because our thinking really matters in terms of how it sets the course of what we do. So what would, beyond I don't want to depend on no man for money, what other things are coming to your mind about thoughts you were having during that time?
Like in high school, college time? Well, I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do. Really, at the time, I was a history major in college because I loved history, but I recognized fairly early on that even at that time, if you were a history major, you only really had a couple of choices. You could be a teacher or you could do further education. And so I knew that I didn't want to be a doctor. And so I was like, oh, I'm argumentative. I'll try that. She's laughing, but...
That's because I can say amen to that.
Yeah, so I did that. That's why I ended up going to law school.
Okay, very good. And so then, obviously, second quarter of your life, you get a law degree. And of course, Melody started dating my husband's brother while we were all in college. So I met Melody when you were in law school,
I was actually, in law school.
You were already in law school.
Yeah.
And so you went into law school. Think as you were passing the bar exam, did I say that correctly?
Yep.
As you were passing the bar exam and you were going to work in that profession, what are some of the ways you were thinking about yourself? Let's specifically focus on how you were thinking about yourself, because you were doing what you set out to do, right? So tell me about that.
Oh, well, I definitely enjoyed it for the first part of it. It was hard. And I had a lot to learn. When you graduate from law school, you don't know how to be a lawyer, unlike when you graduate from medical school. So there was a lot of OJT happening at my job. But I was very fortunate to go to work for somebody who was very willing to work with me and help me to learn. And so I did enjoy it for a season of time, but it was very hard work. But, as we, you get married and you kind of are moving down the path of where is my life going. And actually I saw you left your teaching job and I saw how happy you were. And those thoughts start to creep in like, And I remember clearly I was on the phone arguing with another attorney about when we were going to schedule a deposition. And it was like, we were going to the mat over this ridiculous thing. I'm like, why are we arguing about whether it's 1 o'clock or 1:30? And I thought, I'm sure I'm supposed to be doing this, So that's kind of how that went.
And where do you feel like that the shift happened in your thinking? Because it's one thing to think, I probably shouldn't be doing this, and to long to do something different. It's another to leave a very well-paying career to be home, to have more time with your children. What would you say were some of the, whether you would call them pivotal points or thinking shifts that you had that allowed you to be able to make that move?
Well, I left there when my middle child was 1.5 years old. But while I was pregnant with him, we did a 7-week jury trial, which required us to be away from home. And so Edwin, my husband, was here with Rebecca, who is my oldest, who was 2. Okay. And so I was away from him and from her basically for 7 weeks. I came home on the weekends, but I had to immediately turn around and go away.
Wow.
And I remember coming home one time and Rebecca got hurt and she ran to Dad instead of running to Mom, which you're probably thinking, wow, that's not a very nice thought of you, Melody, to have, because she should be able to go to both parents. But in the moment, I was like, just a knife to my heart. Sorry, I just totally got the microphone. Just a knife to my heart that she had gone to Dad instead of to Mom. And I was like, this is not good. I need to be around more. And then also we had them in preschool, which was fine. The lady was really nice, but they were kind of picking up some things that weren't, while not bad, or like, this is not the way I would do this in my home. And so you start thinking, how do I want that to play out in our life, in our family? And yeah.
So when we think about quarter 2 of your story thus far, right, your time spent in that lawyer space, one of the things that I've heard you say, it was hard. You had to learn how to be a lawyer. So it was hard in that sense. Professionally, you're having to grow. It was also hard once you got married, you had children, you're recognizing, okay, it's not exactly maybe what you thought it would be or how you had hoped it would be. Because, we don't know. We really have no way of knowing, right? I remember thinking when I had Anthony, and I loved my job. I was like, I love what I do. Yeah. I can't imagine not coming back to work.
Right.
Until I didn't want to come back to work.
It happened suddenly. It
did. So if you had to, provide maybe 1 or 2 things that you anchor most, in other words, your season in that space of being a lawyer, how it's made you who you are. What are some of the key pieces, learning points or principles that you take from that?
I would say there's a couple things. First and foremost, I would say money will never make you happy, because I made a lot of it. And I'm not trying to be a jerk about it, but I was very well paid. We had everything we could have wanted, really, materially, and I was so unhappy. By the time we got to the end, I was so unhappy. That's the number one thing. But the number 2 thing I would say is, in retrospect, I don't regret having that experience, because if I hadn't lived through it, I wouldn't know, right? But also, even when you're in a situation where you're unhappy, there's so many things to learn, and both about yourself, but also, for example, some of my biggest takeaways in how to effectively run a business after leaving that situation, I learned from my 10 years of working in a small lawyer's office. You just learn a lot about working with people and how to be effective from a business perspective.
Agreed. And so now you're not arguing over deposition times, but it sounds like you don't ever have to argue about where your practice times are either, or your student times or things like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so quarter 3, so you make the decision. I'm just curious, as you were going in to tell, would we say he's your boss or the principal? What the title?
My boss.
Yeah. That, hey, I'm done. I'm putting my notice in. I'm going to go and sell jewelry. So now we're getting into quarter 3. What were some of the thoughts going through your head? And I would love to know if, like what things were said to you, because obviously you coming out of this amazing, you were very successful by outside eyeballs. You were very successful, and you by your own statement, you were doing well. So 2 things, what were you thinking going in to deliver that? And secondly, what were some of the things you heard that maybe were challenging in that transition?
Yeah. Well, I was nervous, right? Because I had worked for this attorney for 9 years, and it was a small office. So he knew me well, right? And he had watched our family grow. I mean, we were friends. It wasn't just a boss-employee relationship. And we did litigation. So when you're working with somebody, especially in litigation, and you're in a trial and you're working really hard together, you really build relationships. So I was nervous, not because I was worried that he was going to be angry, but it was mainly, I'm sorry, I don't want to disappoint you, kind of thing. Yeah. So, and his response was, how are you going, like his first concern was, how are you going to support yourself, right? So, which I thought was very kind. And if you're interested, I'll tell you what happened like right when I was leaving. But then the other guy, who was the other partner, I wish I could remember exactly the words that he said, but it was something like, don't let your brain rot. Nice. Yeah. He was not my mentor. He was the other guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I'll tell you, I gave 6 weeks notice. And as we got to the end of that time, and my boss kept trying to get me to extend it. But I said, no. And the day that I left, he just barely even would look at me. I think he was, angry, hurt, feeling the emotions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a loss, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's no matter what, it's a loss of skill and talent and contribution that you were making where that's concerned. And then, so you came home. Now we're into third quarter, and you're selling jewelry. We did that together for those 10 years. And so I would love to know some of the things you thought about starting that, and and some of the key learning things you got from that season as well.
Okay. So I had watched her do this for a while, and I was like, oh, well, Elizabeth's doing great at that. I think I could probably do that because she knows what to do, and I'll just do what she did, basically. And that's how that kind of went. But I think, okay, so in my legal career, I mainly worked with men. And
yes, I was hoping you would talk about this. Yeah.
My sort of default setting is very practical. Like if you tell me you have a problem, my first instinct is not to say, oh, I'm sorry.
How can we fix it?
My first instinct is let's fix the problem, right? So that worked fine when I was working with men, because when a young lawyer would come into my office as I was getting further seasoned and would ask me, male lawyer, would tell me a problem, I was like, okay, let's fix that. So in the jewelry business, unlike in the legal business where I was, there's lots of women lawyers, but in my particular area, there weren't a lot doing that thing. But now I'm a jewelry lady and I'm working with women.
Don't try to fix me.
So that was the learning, like you're laughing because you're looking at me, you're like, you're a woman, Melody. I'm like, well, yeah, but my default setting is let me fix your problem. And so I learned a lot about working with women and how to appropriately love on people in that setting, which of course is very different than the legal setting where you're like, get your act together.
It's so true. You and I have this in common, that in many ways people might think we think a lot like men in that we can be very compartmentalized and very much solution oriented. which, when she joked about, well, she really wasn't joking. She was being very serious about, she's argumentative. And so being a lawyer would be really good. I can be very argumentative as well. So we've just had some really fun times over
Indeed.
over our 30 years.
So good.
But we love each other deeply.
We do, yes.
And we love our husbands very deeply too, who have to put up with us.
Oh, goodness.
But, thinking about that struggle, right, of learning, transitioning, changing how you are engaging with people. And also, you're selling a direct to consumer. So you're doing, basically like a business to consumer sale and a lot of interaction. But so think about over that 10 years, how did your thinking change? Because you were thinking as a lawyer, and now you're having to shift that thinking. Right. And serving other women, also being home, your kids are growing up. Yeah. You had a third, our third niece. She's not a third niece, but two nieces and a nephew. You know what I'm saying? How was your your thinking changing during that time?
Well, obviously I became much more focused on kids, and I was the room mom, and I was doing all that other stuff, but I still needed to make money for the household. So I became much more focused on family, on building friendships, building relationships with people. Whereas before it was not always adversarial when you're on the same side as somebody, but it was often adversarial in the legal work. But in the jewelry business and with your home, your focus is on serving people, not on fighting with them. Yeah. So, but it took a while to get that mind shift. It took a long time, and probably one of the best trainings we ever got in the jewelry business, which really stuck with me to try to pivot on that, was the Make Me Feel Important.
Tell them about that. I love it. It was a great training.
It was a great training. The gist of it was especially when you're going into somebody's home and you're meeting people, and right, obviously from a personal level, I'm doing this because I need to make money, right? Like at the base, you're hoping that you're going to be able to.
We're selling something.
You're selling something, but what she was talking about was just put that aside and focus on the person who's in front of you and take interest in them as a human being, because we all want to feel like we are important to somebody else. And it could be that the person who's coming in to you to talk to you has not been made to feel important by anyone for an extended period of time. And so she said, when you're looking at someone, they're basically thinking, make me feel important. And so it was several years into my jewelry business when I finally kind of tried to make that shift.
I remember hearing that multiple times, and what stuck in my mind, even as you're sharing those words, and I don't know if maybe the speaker used this visual or maybe it was a personal conversation that I was having with her. It was like, imagine on their forehead that
I think she did say this.
Make me feel important. So
F-I.
Yeah. And and so as you were verbalizing that, I was like thinking the forehead. Think on that forehead. Make me feel important. And and how can we make others feel important? And I think that the whole thrust of this podcast is thinking that matters. And I believe when our thinking is off the rails, it's and we're not in the best place of how we're thinking it. Maybe it's more negative, or maybe we're more self-deprecating, or whatever that looks like. It's very difficult to be focused on others and making them feel important, because we're trying to bolster our own importance in the midst of that struggle. So tell me a little bit about, so you started your piano and voice lesson school. And it was so fun to see. I mean, I just thought about you having said to me, I'm never going to do that. And then she started doing it. And not only was she doing it, but she was doing it incredibly well and growing at an incredibly fast pace. I mean, it was pretty
I had no idea what I was doing. Like, obviously, I knew how to play the piano, but there are people who, that's what they go to school for, is to learn how to teach. And I was we laugh and I joke about it, but when I first started, I was basically just a week ahead of my students. Honestly.
Yes.
And so it has really been a learning process of understanding how to teach other people, and especially when it's something that you don't personally have there are some things that come easy for me in piano, and there are some things that are harder, right? And so when you're trying to teach something that comes easy for you, but you've never been trained how to teach that thing that comes easy for you, you have to take a minute and figure out how to do that.
Yes. Okay. So when in transitioning to this whole, I want to just thread for a moment the make me feel important. I can imagine that your students that come here, and we're in her in-home studio. She's got an amazing setup. But when your students come, in many ways, they're wanting that as well. They want to feel important. They probably are struggling with, well, rather than me saying it, share some of the things that you've observed, thought processes that your students have struggled or are struggling with, that as their teacher, you're trying to help them work through.
Well, there's always the frustration of, I want to be better. I should be perfect immediately. You have to be okay with making mistakes in piano and music, and that is a struggle for a lot of students. And what I see most often, the way that manifests is they're very tentative, right? They're afraid to move because they're afraid that they're going to make a mistake.
That analysis paralysis?
Yes.
Okay.
Kind of thing. Or they'll play really, really softly because they don't want to make an error that somebody's going to hear. So that's sort of the thing that we have to work through first, is it's okay to make a mistake, and especially when it gets to recital time. And so I literally maybe 5 times in my life, and I've been playing piano and singing since I was 3 years old, maybe 5, maybe 6 times, I have played 100% of the notes correctly. There's always an error, and that's just live music, but it's not fun when you're the one up there who makes the mistake. So it's very vulnerable. It's very vulnerable.
Oh, that's so true. So you're a week ahead of your students.
Oh my gosh, that was a scary time.
And then you got a rhythm to, definitely put a pun on that word. You got a rhythm going of, just your students, your scheduling, all of those pieces. And then COVID happened.
Oh, that was fun.
Oh yeah. So because everybody up to that point, they were coming here, right? And of course, you also were going and being, you were accompanying them like we were talking about when we first started. So COVID, was one of those moments where people had to have a shift in their thinking. What was that for you?
Well, I was very fortunate in that, since my husband's an IT guy who's been working from home for much of our marriage, he was able to literally on a dime shift what I was doing here. Because almost everybody, I'm trying to remember if I had any attrition at all, and I don't think I did, from when we went to people coming physically here to online, doing lessons. But what was interesting about that was, for the kids, I had more than one set of parents. I might go as far to say 5 or 6 sets of parents who contacted me and said, thank you for continuing lessons, because everything else in their world had changed.
Yes.
And the one thing that was constant was their piano lessons, and that they could practice and sing. We did both of those. So that was nice to be able to do that. But then at the end of COVID, having everybody coming back together and being able to make music together again was huge. Like, I remember just aching in my soul, aching because I could do it here by myself, but music is meant to be shared. Yeah. So it was hard.
Yeah, that's watching you make that shift, and you and Edwin really working as a team to put it all together, and not really works for the purpose of the podcast, but if you could see like all of the technology that they use, so when it's necessary, you have access to it, is so incredibly important. So now you're 8 years in, and you're doing what you love.
Yes.
Right. Yes, you love music, but even more so of equipping young men and women to grow as musicians,
Right.
to go out and make a difference in the world through music, even if it's not professional,
Right.
but it's just through how they're living their life. What would you say at this stage? What are some of the things that you're looking forward to over the next few years of continuing to pursue your passion?
I didn't realize how much I enjoyed watching the students reach their success, whatever that looks like. One of my most advanced students, the one that I mentioned, who was it's not the stage, but you know what I mean, at church up in front, how excited he was when he got to play with big church, like with the big worship team the first time. And I have more than one piano student who's doing that now because a lot of my students come from church.
Okay.
And watching my voice student who's up there singing now up in front. And it's not even that. It's the kids who were the tentative ones who were worried about making a mistake. You see them just blossom and bloom and get excited about presenting their piece, but especially the ones that I've had over years and years and years, they get more and more confident and more confident. And they might not ever play at Carnegie Hall, but the fact that they had the courage to come and take lessons and perform, it just teaches them just confidence and learning to deal with mistakes and how to when you fall, you got to get up. You got to keep going, kind of thing. So there's lots of life lessons.
And I'm hearing some key thoughts that I'm sure you're speaking to them and getting them to speak to their own selves. Like, you've got to keep going. You fall, you get back up. What would be some other phrases that when you think back, like in working with your students, that you are constantly reinforcing with them to help them have good thinking around that journey that they're on?
We talk a lot about everyone makes mistakes. That's a big one that we talk about a lot. We also talk a lot about how something that might loom large to us, when you're looking at it from the perspective of the other person, they're just so excited and pleased to have heard music, right? They're not sitting there going, oh, you made a mistake. Oh, you made a mistake, for the most part. I mean, some people are not nice, but most people are not doing that. They're just excited to see their child play or to see their grandchild play. Or in this case, for this recital, we actually have all of the parents. We have required participation. There's going to be some family member who's coming up to help with the recital. And so some of the parents they play or they sing, but some of the parents literally are going to go dink on one note on the piano. But the kids are teaching their parents. I'm not teaching their parents. The kids are teaching their parents how to participate in that. So
that's awesome.
They're passing along what they're learning.
Oh, so man, I love it. I love it. It's what's interesting in a football game, there are 4 quarters, and the goal, one team is wanting to win, right? More so in this conversation, it has been about the game of life, right? And winning in the game of life. So how would you say, like, and you still got a lot more life to live, right? But how would you say in the game that you've played thus far, how have you seen you winning in the game that you've played thus far?
Well, it took a long time for, it's interesting that you did use the football analogy, because things can seem like they're not going well in the first and second quarter, right? Or you think they're going fine, but then by halftime you're like, oh,
we need to make some adjustments.
And so we've made some adjustments. Who knows what tomorrow will bring, but I think sort of if I had to look back over the course of time, you really can't regret those seasons of life that maybe in retrospect you're like, oh, I wasn't really in the right space, or I could have probably done that differently, because God uses all of those things to shape our character, and he brings people in and out of our lives during those seasons of time for reasons that may not be evident until later. And if you hadn't maybe made that mistake or gone the wrong way, you wouldn't have learned those lessons or met those people. So
it's awesome. Yeah. So the podcast is called Thinking That Matters. I want every guest to be able to share, why do you believe it is important to cultivate thinking that matters?
I think, especially with all of the things that we're bombarded with, we can be sort of cast about by thinking that doesn't matter, because there's lots of very loud voices doing 30-second sound bites of things that don't really matter, like you need to make a lot of money in order to be happy in this world, or anybody can raise your kids just fine. And so there's a lot of that comes in. But the only thinking that really matters is, what the Lord thinks about you, or what the Lord thinks about where things are supposed to go. But the challenge, of course, is trying to align what's happening in your head, because you're hearing all these voices, with that still small voice, right? Who's telling you, this is what I want for you. This is where I want you to go.
I love that. And for those who are listening, that, ultimately we are bombarded, what I'm hearing you say, we are bombarded with a lot of voices, and we've got to have that steady voice of truth that is helping to anchor our thinking. Because as you know, I always like to say that our thinking is so incredibly important, because when you cultivate thinking that matters, you can live a life that matters. And thank you for living a life that matters. I'll try not to cry now. Thanks for listening, everybody.